The next section that we're going to talk about in chapter 3 is about imperialism and the growth of sport. Imperialism is defined in your text as the dominance by imposing one's culture upon another country. There are different types of imperialism. From a basic standpoint, there's forced and non-forced imperialism. Imperialism that you typically hear about if you're taking history classes is that of forced imperialism, and that you are forcing your culture upon another one, typically through physical force, that is through military expansion. And so historically, if we look at the European countries as well as the American countries and the expansion of one's cultural identity into other less developed cultures in our society through the 1400s and even into the 1800s, today those are the ones we hear about the most. And so there's actually another video that I'm posting. I want you to go watch about European imperialism, just to give you an understanding, an idea of this idea of what is imperialism and how it impacts us. Imperialism was a significant reason why some sports were spread globally. And so if you look at some examples of that, one of them is Britain's expansion. So British expansion and imperialism was part of that last video that hopefully you're going to watch or have watched. This expansion also brought with them a lot of the cultural activities, and that is cricket. So if you look at countries that have a very popular or prominent cricket culture and industry, it's typically those that have British roots. And so South Africa, the West Indies, India, and Australia, all of these are cricket is very popular, and much of that is because it's been handed down from one generation to another. And that was, again, forced imperialism in many ways into these cultures. Britain also has influence on the United States, because if you think about it, the United States was a result of European, specifically English imperialism. And essentially, some of the games that we see today have British roots. So track, football, baseball, field hockey, and cricket all have aspects to them that are from the British culture. And look at America. Obviously, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a second, but America's had an influence significantly on the Japanese culture, and specifically in baseball, and why baseball is so popular today in those countries. And so getting into that, there is a case study I want to introduce to you. There's a book called The Spalding World Tour. It's about the expansion of baseball globally. It's not just about Japan, but it does talk a little bit about that. So to start off with, baseball became well known in Japan because of Americans' influence on the country. There's a lot of things about the culture of baseball as well as the culture of Japan that fit well together. The game emphasizes the same things that the Japanese culture, much of the Japanese culture does and did at the time of its expansion. So order, perseverance, harmony, self-resistance, all of these things are coincided and work well together with the Japanese culture. Also, baseball was expanded to other countries such as Latin America in similar circumstances and for similar reasons in the late 1800s. But again, if you look at today's Major League Baseball roster, has a great influence from Japan as well as Latin America, and partially because of things that have happened. And so if you look at this idea of imperialism in sport, this is one of the things that was called, it was an Australian cricket team's battle cry, is that, as I would just mention, British imperialism brought cricket to Australia. They said beat them at their own game, and there was basically matches between two countries, the two countries, that is Australia and Britain, and they would call it a test or a test series. Similar mentality came with Japan, but with baseball. In 1896, the Yokohama Athletic Club hosted the American Prep School, and for the first time in their history, they beat them at their own game. In other words, Japanese beat the American Prep School 24-9 and 32-9. It was a big deal. And then again in 1910, Japan beat the Japanese national team beat the University of Chicago. And so these are examples of pride that come from beating one at their own games through this imperialism. Now, if you look at sport in Japan, specifically baseball in Japan, you see some of the same similarities. So, for example, if you look at some of these images, the Nippon League, which is the baseball league in Japan, oftentimes have not teams that are, we've got the Texas Rangers or the Houston Astros. Instead, you have corporations that are the team's name. So the SoftBank Hawks or the Nippon Ham Fighters. And so these are companies that are taking over brand names. A lot different, but still has the influence. So the book that I'm referring to is called Ambassadors and Pinstripes. You should look it up if you're interested at all in baseball history, and specifically global baseball history. But the Ambassadors and Pinstripe my face is kind of blocking the book, was about Albert Spalding. Albert Spalding, if you've heard the name Spalding and you've been in baseball, you probably have. Spalding basically manufactured goods for baseball players, gloves and bats, and basically realized that there was a market for baseball worldwide. And just so happens that he makes sporting equipment for baseball. And so between 1889 and 1888 and 1889, he hired professional baseball to become what was termed tourism. They were also called ambassadors for the United States. In other words, they were ambassadors to pinstripes. Ambassadors in Pinstripes. That's where the title comes from. And he would basically tour all over the globe, spreading baseball and the ideologies that come from baseball to different cultures where he thought there would be a fit. Obviously, at the same time, trying to make sure that his product was out there so that they could see it. Teams went through a lot of countries. They went through Hawaii, then New Zealand, Australia, Ceylon, Egypt, Italy, France, England, and obviously Japan. One of the advantages that Spalding had was what, in a lot of business terms and specifically marketing, is this idea called first mover's advantage. First mover's advantage basically says when you're the company to first develop a product and market it to the general consumers or to a target market, you have an advantage over the person who comes in second and who comes in third because you have the technology, you've been doing it longer, and typically you become more profitable. Same thing was true with smartphones. The first one to really develop a smartphone that every consumer could use was the iPhone. They had a first mover's advantage. While others had come before them, created similar products, they had not found one that the majority of consumers in everyday life could use. So first mover's advantage was given to Spalding. He was going into developing countries and spending money to promote the product, and these countries that were developing were looking for avenues for sport activities and saw good things in the United States. Also, what Spalding had to overcome was this idea that we've been talking about since the beginning of the class is cultural differences between countries, cultural difference between the game and the nation. The reason it fits so well with other countries is that of, for example, in Japan, the perseverance, the order, those types of things. Also, one of the things he had to overcome was nobody knew about the game. So how is he going to sell equipment without people having a knowledge of the game? And so he had to do a lot of coaching and teaching of the cultures there. And then again, this whole idea was about imperialism. Imperialism traditionally has had negative image because it's been forced imperialism. This is an example of non-forced imperialism, where he's bringing the sport into a different culture, but at the same time, people don't want to just be given or been shoved upon them a certain idea or culture. And so what this tells us about marketers and marketing of sport globally into other cultures is you always have to do research about the cultural differences before you go into it. It goes back to our case study of the NFL. Really what we have to do is involve other cultural leaders in the marketing plan. That's one of the reasons why the NFL wasn't as successful. And so the Spalding's World Tour really gave us an idea of using sport through imperialism action, being non-forced, to try to spread the culture, which then in turn helped their business.